Today we're talking about Hastened Fatalis. Especially in lower ranks of all game modes, Hastened Fatalis has quite a high level of popularity, and I keep getting messages with builds that include Hastened Fatalis on various characters and various roles, asking if those builds are good and whatnot. I've been asked why I hate Fatalis so much, and so on and so on, and we'll talk about just that. First of all, I don't hate Fatalis. Fatalis has its place in the game, it has a purpose, and I think for that purpose it's very good. The problem is that many people don't really understand the purpose of it and the downsides to it. Many people use Hastened Fatalis as a training wheel. They use it on any hunter, build it very early, and that way basically have to rely less on hitting their basics, because if they do, every successive basic becomes easier to hit anyways. Till a certain level of play, that is completely acceptable, there's nothing wrong with that, but eventually you will face enemies that are not building Hastened Fatalis and that have, well, more mechanical skill already, are used to not playing with Hastened Fatalis, and they will have builds that don't include it and therefore have a lot more damage or power steal or life steal or something over you that will really make your life hard when using Hastened Fatalis. What needs to be understood when it comes to Hastened Fatalis is that Hastened Fatalis doesn't really offer all too much in terms of damage. To throw it into a direct comparison here, Hastened Fatalis gives you 30% attack speed. That is literally all the direct damage that is on the item. Movement speed doesn't directly give damage, and the passive also doesn't directly give damage. The item costs 2,140 gold, and if you compare that to Ekival costs 1,700. It has 30% attack speed, sounds familiar. It has 10 penetration, and it has a plus up to 30 power steal. So you get more penetration, more power, and the same attack speed in another item, which makes that item a lot better in terms of raw damage already, and it's also cheaper. Other similar items around the same price range have other benefits, for example lifesteal. Or you have Odysseus' Bow, which has the additional bounce effect, which is massive in terms of the raw damage that provides. Therefore, Hastened Fatalis really is about the passive, and as such, you will sacrifice damage just to get this passive. Now, there are a few gods that basically almost always still build Hastened Fatalis. These gods are Kali, Bakasura, and Freya. Why is that? In the case of Kali, it's much more important for her to have sticking power to the enemy, because she gets decent damage otherwise already. She gets extra power from her 3. She otherwise builds full damage. She doesn't often go into defensive items unless you're doing something like Winged Blade, Magi's Blessing, but that's about it really. And as such, you have a much more room to build damage later. At the same time, her kit just needs something to stick to the enemy. Otherwise, you have that fast attack chain, but you're not really able to get it off efficiently. The most important part here is that Kali will always build Concise. And Concise works very well with attack speed, which is what we get to later, what makes it kind of beneficial for other characters as well. So if your goal is to just get as many hits off as possible, which is the case for Kali, then Hastened Fatalis can work in her favor, while also giving you that sticking power which she desperately needs, because besides the stun she doesn't really have much else. The next god is Bakasura. Bakasura also builds Concise, as such she gets a decent amount of benefit from Hastened Fatalis attack speed. He has true damage on a 3, as such penetration and stuff like that don't matter as much for him, because he will get the true damage anyways, and the more hits you deal that with, like the faster your attack speed is, the more hits you get off, the better the 3 becomes, so Hastened Fatalis works in his favor in that regard as well. And Bakasura also doesn't really have any lockdown in his kit. He has his ultimate which slows a little bit, but he's not one that could reliably slow down enemies, and therefore he kind of needs something else to stick to the enemy. As a melee character, this is generally a lot more important than it is for ranged. So with Bakasura, you could theoretically go for Frostbound Hammer as well. It would basically give you the same purpose to a lesser extent, but the problem here is that not only would you lose attack speed, but also some extra movement speed, and the tanky stats don't really benefit him as much at the moment. There have been times where Frostbound Bakasura was a more popular pick than it is now. At the moment, Hastened Fatalis is really what he needs in order to be able to stick to the enemy enough to kill them. The third god is Freya. Now with Freya, it's once again a little different, because she gets most of her damage from her 1-2 combo with the base damage of those attacks. You get a lot of penetration on Freya, and you get a lot of attack speed, so you can maximize the amount of hits with her too, and not so much focus on building high damage. I have toyed around with no Hastened Freya in the past, and it's really problematic. What you want to do in that case is just use the 2 without the 1, so you will slow the enemy down in order to reliably beat down on them, but at the same time that doesn't really work, because then you don't get enough damage off to actually kill someone or threaten someone at least. So with Freya there's a bit of an oddball case here. It's just, once again, the factor that she has high base damage and she needs extra attack speed and she needs extra sticking power. So those 3 are the ones where I would say, yeah, you do need Hastened Fatalis. There are some other gods that I will point out here, which can make good use of it. I wouldn't say you have to build it, but it's almost always a decent choice. The first one is Vemana. Vemana makes very good use of Frostbound Hammer, and I would usually prefer that, simply due to the fact that he has that kind of a tanky character to him and stuff like that. But I can see reasonings for Hastened Fatalis, especially when you're in the ultimate and you want to get towards a target first, then the extra movement speed helps, and it really helps sticking to a target throughout the whole ultimate. So it's not the most popular pick for him, but I can see why people would want to pick it. The other one is Medusa. For Medusa, it just works so brilliantly well in combination with her passive. She can move so fast from side to side that way, and that is kind of a huge benefit for her over other hunters when it comes to trading. So for that, Hastened Fatalis always has a bit of a niche. Then again, it doesn't really complement the rest of her kit too much. She's very ability based otherwise, so you really have to consider if it's worth it for you. But I've ran it in the past myself, and I will say that this is one of the hunters where I would say, yeah, there is a concept to it, at least an idea to it that would make it work a little better. The last one here is Izanami. With Izanami, it's a bit of an odd case. The problem with Izanami, as I pointed out before, is there's not really a perfectly efficient build for her yet, in my opinion. And Izanami has those basics which are kind of harder to hit. And one confirmation of the basic will allow you to proc Hastened Fatalis. So there's kind of a little benefit there. I wouldn't necessarily build it, I wouldn't really recommend it, but I can see where it's coming from, where the idea is coming from. There are also some outliers that at least used to have Hastened Fatalis at some point. Ao Kuang in Season 2, when it was still more of a, well, basic attack focused build, was often built with Hastened Fatalis. Poseidon, when he is built before basic attacks, is still built with Hasten, though that very rarely happens. And Zeus, when he was ever played as a basic attack mage, could make use of Hastened Fatalis, but those are cases that are rare or in the past. And then we have the whole class of hunters. 2 hunters where I would say there's a little more of a reason to build it are Skadi and Artemis, simply because they don't have escapes. AMC not so much because he has extra movement speed and attack speed already with his hives. But overall, these are the 2 where I would say, okay, I would still absolutely not recommend building it. I think there are much, much better builds for them, especially with items like Wind Demon being available. But if you really want to build it, you really want that extra movement speed, and you really think you need that sticking power, I guess maybe there's a bit of a reason to do it. There's a bit of an argument to be made here. But then again, Artemis also has a massive attack speed steroid, so you really have to build around that and stuff like that. So it becomes kind of awkward once again. It's really an odd spot for that item already. And this continues if you look at other hunters. You can build Hastened Fatalis on hunters, and sometimes it was at some point even once built in the SPL. It's not impossible to build it, so to speak. And if you really think you need it for trading purposes, it's not complete trash as long as you actually use the passive to juke as well and not just to chase people down. But you will always sacrifice a lot, and that's what you have to be aware of. And there are also plenty of gods where you should absolutely not build the item. The names that I want to drop here are Sol, Kronos, and Jing Wei. All 3 of these have some way to remove the basic attack penalty already. They don't need Hastened Fatalis. If you use your abilities properly, then why would you get Hastened Fatalis on top of that when your abilities already allow you for the same effect? There are also a lot of assassins where people think that you for some reason need Hastened Fatalis, and you really don't. Namely, Nemesis, who has a massive amount of slows and good attack cancels and stuff like that. Plenty of sticking power there. Arachne, who has the best ways to just slow enemies down and speed herself up and stay with them forever. A Willish, who has plenty of lockdown in her kit already and a lot more ability burst and doesn't really need that much attack speed in an item without any extra benefits. Fenrir, don't even get me started. Fenrir is so ability focused at the moment that you really don't need it. Mercury, yes, he gets some extra power from movement speed, but that's not nearly enough to warrant building this item when he benefits so much more from other stuff like crit, like even cooldown reduction, like lifesteal, anything, because he already has a massive amount of attack speed in his kit, and if you want extra attack speed on top of that, there are other items for that, and you really don't need to stick to targets for long if you crit burst them down in 3 to 4 hits. Erlang Shen, who has his built-in Hastened Fatalis in the 1. So there are plenty of gods where you should really not have any reason to build Hastened Fatalis. And these are the names that stand out the most to me. And people build them on them over and over and over. And don't even think about building it on purely ability-based assassins. Like Susano, there is no reason to build Hastened Fatalis on Susano ever. And that's what you need to understand with this item. This item means less damage, especially if you're ability focused. It gives you some better sticking power, which helps some characters. Some characters really need it because their kits otherwise are not allowed for it. It has nice interaction synergy with kin size, but you still need extra penetration for kin size to work because it's not true damage. And as such, the applications for this item are limited and very specific. If you're building it every single game, you're effectively hindering your progress at learning the character that you're trying to learn, unless you're building it on one of the few that I named in the beginning, because you kind of have to always work with the Hastened Fatalis passive and you don't get used to playing without it, and that's a problem. So really consider when you need it. As a solo laner, as a warrior, Vemana's the only one who should ever consider it, especially because Frostbound Hammer exists and is usually much better for you. And with the few niche picks, it may become back in the meta eventually. For example, Ao Kuang. Maybe there will be an Ao Kuang phase where he goes back to attack speed. Maybe it will help then, we'll see. But generally, the pool of gods that really make good use of it is very limited. That's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.